You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing news from the local area and around the world. We aim to bring Salford to the world and the world to Salford. We're very fortunate on this show to have interviewed the world's best athletes, sports people, trainers, coaches. We have an aim to increase participation, awareness of sport. We also have a segment where we interview some of the world's most influential people in the field of psychology and related fields who've been very kind to join us on the show and give us some insights into their ideas, really, their research, or generally all things around that area. And today we're a fascinating guest who is going to talk all things sports psychology. It's Kim Blewett. She's a sports psychologist at Newcastle United Football Club. Has been very kind to join us on the show. Kim, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on board, Kim. Just sort of in terms of sports psychology, where did it begin for you, Kim? What inspired you to go into sports psychology?
Yeah, so I think I grew up absolutely loving sport, always being really keen on kind of all sport, really. My dad was a keen cricketer when I was growing up, so spent quite a lot of time around him playing, and then always loved football. My mum's side of the family were always big football fans, and I suppose when I was at school and going through kind of the teenage years, my PE teachers were unbelievable and kept me engaged in sport when lots of my friends and my peers were dropping out. Yeah. So from there, always just absolutely loved sport. And then I started to get this real interest in people, how they behave, what makes them who they are, what influences their behaviour, why do we see some people on these high pressure stages in sport succeeding and some of them really crumbling under that pressure, and that really, really intrigued me. And I think for me, being able to go into kind of that sporting world with trying to support people through their journeys, for me it was a big thing to bring care and empathy into a high performance world full of pressure and stress and challenge, and I think the combination of all of that stuff just got me so interested in the field, and that's kind of, I had my mind set quite early on that was what I wanted to do. Got into it through all of that, really. That's
brilliant, Kim. That's really interesting, sort of in terms of how you sort of you got involved into sports psychology. And in terms of challenges, what are some of the challenges and sort of, if you want to call them barriers, I guess, but just generally that you faced on your journey, just for the benefit of our listeners to sort of get an insight into what the journey's been like for you?
Yeah, I think there's been lots of different things, I suppose. When you're working in those high performance worlds, results are obviously, it's a results driven industry, and I think results are an outcome to something, and we cannot get away from the pressure that comes with winning, because that's what we rely on for jobs, for funding, for all sorts of different elements. We can't get away from the thought that results mean something, because they do. But then a big challenge is at what cost does that result come? And for me, the fundamentals of winning are having psychologically safe environments that have a focus on well-being. And I think trying to change that perspective, that the well-being side and focusing on people and care and relationships isn't about fluffiness. This is actually about creating a high-performance environment that is going to give us the results that we need to thrive in the industry. So trying to get away from that idea that the result is the most important thing, even though it really is important, but they don't determine our worth as people, and that goes for staff, that goes for players, that goes for everybody that's involved in it. The more we can separate those two concepts, I think the more we're able to perform, because we're able to focus on what's happening in front of us, rather than thinking, what if this happens, what if that happens? And I think it is about that. I think changing that perspective has been a real kind of challenge, but I think we're getting to a place where people are kind of more understanding of this, because I think more and more athletes are speaking out about how they feel is so important to how they perform. And we're seeing the influence of people being more understanding and more caring and all of this, and we're seeing the influence of those kind of leaders and how that's having a positive impact on performance. So I think that is kind of really progressing. And I think in terms of other things, in terms of psychology in general, it's a long way behind some of the other disciplines, and has been. It's consistently, I suppose, it's just where it's sports science and medicine saw this really big increase, the introduce of strength and conditioning into sport, and psychology is kind of following that pathway now, and we're getting there. And it's taking a lot of work for the people that are doing this kind of every day, but it's becoming more and more normalised as part of a player's development.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the challenge of breaking that barrier is becoming less and less prevalent, because players are more willing to come and speak to a psychologist, and it's more like us breaking the barrier as the practitioner that's working in that setting of being like, this is normal, I'm a normal person, like we're having a normal conversation, this isn't a scary thing. So it has been a challenge, but it's kind of definitely getting to a better place, especially with young players now.
Absolutely. I mean, like you says there, I mean, the thing is, like, sport in itself is evolving all the time. It's just things are moving quickly in sports science, and every sort of variable that you can sort of cover in performance is sort of key now, as the game just gets faster and sort of more advanced all the time, really. A lot of sort of variables to succeed. And in terms of highlights for you, Kim, what would you say would be some of the highlights in your sort of career thus far? I know that there'll be many more to come, but at this point, what would you say has been highlights for you?
I think there's kind of lots of different things that I find like really exciting about working in the environment, and there's been a lot of highlights. I think when you build relationships with people in general, so like even when I just get a text from a player that I've worked with in the past just to check in, or you see one of them, you've gone to watch one of their games and they come and have a chat with you at the end of the game, or anything like that. I think the relationships that you manage to build with people in the environment, them knowing that you care about them knowing that you're there for them, that for me is a real highlight, because I kind of, like I said, with what got me into it, I wanted to be a caring and empathetic person within this really highly pressurised world, and that kind of aligns with what I've been trying to do in terms of breaking the barriers and all of this, that they see it as a normal part of their development, that they want to text like the psychologist after their performance to check in, and from that, I suppose, like just seeing the impact that the work that you do has on players, whether that's helping them just from a perspective of the happier, they're more motivated with any element of their life, or whether that's in terms of their performance. I think both of those are equally kind of, for me, as a success marker of what's going on.
Absolutely,
yeah, and I think kind of watching them, so I've kind of worked a lot with the end of the youth development phase into professional development phase with young footballers, so those transitions from being a schoolboy into being a young apprentice into being a young professional, and then some of them obviously going on to debut for their first teams. And I think when you meet someone at sort of 15, 16 years old, and then you watch their journey and you see them grow and develop as a player, as a human being, and then they go on to make their debut, and you see how proud they are, and you see how proud their family is, and just getting to see some of that behind the scenes work that you get to do, and just getting to witness, kind of be part, that tiny little part of that journey is a real highlight. I think that is just something that is, you can't, like, it's a priceless part of it, is just getting them to watch people go on to be successful. And that might not be making a first team debut, that might be them going on to get a scholarship in America, it might be them going on to get a place at university, like just getting them to watch them be successful and be happy in what they're doing. That is just an absolute, like, when you watch that journey, it's incredible.
Yeah, that's really powerful stuff, Kim, I think, because I mean, you've mentioned there, I mean, the thing is that the reality is, in terms of becoming a professional footballer, I don't know what the percentage is, but, it's sort of very, very difficult to sort of, but equally I sort of get a sense of skills that you sort of work with helps the players, not just in football, but outside the sport. I don't know, obviously, in terms of, whether that's sort of, part of your remit, but did you sort of feel or get a sense, Kim, that even away from sport, these sort of skills they learn and sort of, just the world can be a tough place sometimes. They can be useful skills to transfer in life in general too?
Absolutely. I think young players coming through academy systems quite often don't realise the unbelievable skill set that they have when if they are released from the system. And it's, when you think about, so when they're a scholar, they're 16 years old, and they're coming in, they're coming into the club at sort of quite often 8:30 in the morning. They're not leaving till 4, 5 o'clock at night. They're doing football sessions, gym sessions, analysis sessions, psychology workshops on lifestyle skills, workshops on all these other elements of their program that they have to put all of that time and effort into. They're doing that 5 days a week, plus then they're having a game on a Saturday. And you think, like, what jobs are there for young people that they have to commit that amount to? Absolutely. And I think that skill set that they have of that hard work, dedication, commitment, all of that, like, there's a perception, I think, in the public about football and what a footballer is. And actually, they're very normal, especially these young kids. They're very normal kids, and they're trying to do something that's totally abnormal for their age. So I always talk about football, whether that's a young player, a teenager, an adult. They're normal people doing an abnormal job, yet what they're looked at through this like microscope because of what they do, and the profession is kind of so examined by the public that everybody sees the mistakes they make, and everybody sees all of these other elements of their lives that in a normal workplace would never be part of what they see.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's just that perception of it, but they have an unbelievable skill set when they come out of a scholarship, and when they're a young professional player, they've got so many amazing things about them as a person that would make them phenomenal or any career, and I definitely see that as part of the journey of them being in an academy.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's important that sort of, obviously, at that age, I would imagine, first and foremost, their dream is to become a professional footballer and play in these sort of great stadiums in the UK and around the world even. But obviously there's only so many places in professional sport and so many variables that are involved in making it. But I think you made a really good point there, Kim, a really important point for particularly any young sports people listening to the show, that the skill set that they acquire along the way can be really useful. So whether they do a scholarship in the States and do a degree or in the UK or whatever, really, or they decide to sort of start a business, whatever they decide to do, there's a good skill set they've got in terms of sort of moving forward. Like they work with people like yourself and many great professionals around them. It's a great learning, and there are other sort of jobs as well involved in sport that they maybe could look at in terms of sort of going forward. Do you feel that sort of in professional? Do you ever sort of see that, Kim, in your experience with some players? Okay, they might not make it as a professional, but they sort of go on to have a fulfilling career or something else in a different area.
Yeah, definitely. I think you see young players go on to do lots of different things. I know players that have worked with in the past have gone on to be trained as accountants or go on to study law at university, or have gone on to coach, or all sorts of different elements. I mean, with staff that I've worked with within academy and first team environments, quite often you'll see people working in those settings that have gone on to be a scholar themselves and maybe gone on to play for a bit of time, but not fulfilled maybe what they wanted to in terms of their career, but have then channeled that into becoming a coach or becoming an analyst or whatever it might be. There are lots of different pathways within the industry, but there's so many different pathways without it. I mean, having conversations with players about other careers, and you talk to some of them and they're like, I want to be a firefighter, and you think the skill set in football and the skill set in that, they're very transferable. Absolutely. They don't necessarily see that initially, but when you kind of explain to them some of the things that they've got to do, and I think you do definitely see players go on to be really successful once, and it's just them getting over sometimes that disappointment of not fulfilling exactly what their dream was. And that's where I think within the academy systems. It's around this, giving them that gain of being in an academy. They're learning things that are going to make them successful in their life, no matter what they go on to do. I think that's a really important part of it.
Absolutely, definitely, and especially in a field as competitive as football, and so many young people have a dream of being a professional footballer, and statistically, the law of averages suggests only so many can make it, and transferring these sort of skills, and I suppose having the opportunity in itself to play, or at least to train every day, is something in itself to sort of give it a good go and sort of see what happens. And in terms of just for our listeners, Kim, I know it's difficult to define a typical day for you. I'm sure every day is different. But generally speaking, what's a typical day roughly for yourself in terms of sort of, for our listeners who are probably wondering, what does a sports psychologist do during, in a typical working day? Is there any sort of thing that you can sort of share in terms of some insights around that?
Yeah, so I suppose I have three main outcomes as to what I want to see from the work that I do, and that would be around creating an authentic elite culture, breaking the barriers to accessing psychology, and individualising support strategies for everybody within the environment. So that would look like staff workshops around coaches, so stuff around psychological safety. How do we build it? What are we doing every day that creates an environment where players feel like they can make a mistake and it's not held against them, where they feel valued for who they are, beyond that result, about building relationships, and then it might be talking about growth and maturation, how the brain changes at these different phases, and trying to just support the coaches in how they then respond to players of different ages. That might form part of the day. There might also be some kind of observations around training sessions. So we'll quite often go out with coaches and just kind of observe what's going on within their training session, and then we'll kind of debrief that afterwards around communication, clarity of message. Are they responding appropriately to the needs of the individuals in that group? So are we appropriately challenging and supporting the players in that group? That will be something that we'd talk about. There might be sort of family workshops, so quite often in evenings you'd look at bringing parents or other support individuals that are in their life. So it could be siblings for some of them, cousins, friends, all sorts of different people that if they want to come in, there's the opportunity for them to come in and learn around how to offer the best support, I suppose, and how to be facilitating that journey rather than hindering it in any way. And then one-to-one sessions might form part of it as well. So it's kind of like all of those different elements all wrapped up into varying different days. So it could be one day come in, observe a training session, have a debrief with a coach over lunch, deliver a workshop potentially for an under-18 group straight after lunch, then go into a couple of one-to-one sessions in the afternoon, then go into a sort of family workshop in the evening. And yeah, like you say, it will be very varied every day as to what it looks like. And then I think in terms of the individualised support strategies, it was just, that for me is around everybody in the environment knowing each other well enough to appropriately challenge and support each other to create this real point where we can develop resilience and we can perform to our best and learn, but also looking at who is the person, who is the player or the member of staff or the professional, and then what does that all look like under pressure. So really trying to get an understanding of that day to day would be a big part of that, and that comes through the kind of profiling, observations again, all sorts of different things.
Brilliant. No, that's really interesting, Kim. And one thing that sort of strikes me there, in sort of you've given us a really interesting insight. No doubt the listeners are sort of sort of been fascinated by what you're all involved. But one thing, sort of speaking to you there, is sort of the realization that there's a lot of work involved, a lot that you do, and I suppose, in terms of yourself, Kim, just out of curiosity, really, how do you sort of, do you have your own strategies to sort of, I can imagine, obviously, you're giving a lot, and do you have a strategy for yourself in terms of keeping it, like who motivates the motivator type thing? Yeah, it's an interesting
kind of point which quite often gets raised around sports psychology, and I think it's important when you're operating in these environments that you have your own supervision and you have your own support network outside of the environment, inside the environment you're in, knowing who you can talk to when things aren't going so well or you're having a tough day or any of those things, knowing the support pathways, in terms of if you're hearing things from players that you're worried about and things like that. So working really closely with safeguarding teams, and then obviously when you kind of share that, you're able to relax a little bit, knowing that the information's with the people that are able to best support the individual that you're working with. And I think just making sure that you get a little bit, as much balance, I suppose, as you can. Like, for me, it's around making sure I do time in, spending time with friends and family, and making sure I book off, like, every now and then I'll take a full Sunday completely away, switch off my work phone, switch it all off, and just make sure I take that time for myself. But yeah, I think supervision is such an important element of it's so important in every other domain of psychology.
Absolutely,
in sports psychology it should be no different, because we're dealing with well-being and performance. It's not just performance elements, it is definitely around, I mean, more of the issues I come across are around well-being first and foremost, and then we get into performance after working together for quite a long time.
Absolutely,
there's definitely elements of making sure you've got your own support in place, because it can be a tough and isolating place to be.
Absolutely, I can imagine, like, you know, sort of creating that sort of environment and the sort of the volume and also the energy required to put all that on and sort of be at that sort of 100% throughout the day. It's having that sort of outlet. I think that's a really great point you've made there, Kim, about supervision, and I think obviously in sort of the clinical area of psychology and psychotherapy, that's sort of a given, and sports psychology, like you says, I think the demands are probably different, I guess, in some respects, but the demands nevertheless, in terms of, you know, like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you know, sport is about winning and you know, so on and so forth, but obviously sort of, you know, having the right systems in place to give ourselves the best chance are key, and it's really fascinating what you do. And one of the sort of questions I generally ask, when we interview, we sort of ask, one of the questions I ask is, you know, what would you sort of tell younger self? And I suppose the reason for that is because it's difficult to give anyone advice going into any field, because everyone's sort of on a different journey. But I suppose it's one way for our listeners who are considering to go in the field, some of the points they may want to sort of at least sort of consider, and obviously it's not giving anyone advice, it's just sort of some tips on your own journey. So if you sort of reach out to yourself at the start of your journey, Kim, what sort of would you say to the younger self when you first began your journey in the world of sports psych?
I think it's around, like, really immersing yourself in everything that you do to try and learn the most from everybody around you and take as much knowledge from every experience that you get. And it's kind of the same thing that I always talk to young players about as well. It's about, when you're in an environment, take as much as you can from it. Be almost selfish with how much you demand from the people around you, because you learn so much from those kind of conversations with people. Sort of, I know, working with players that have had careers in the game, really going and having, like, the courage to go up to them and say, ask them about what the challenges they face, ask them what would have helped them, learn from them, because they've been through that journey as well. So I think it would be around, like, really immersing yourself in those environments, getting as much experience as you possibly can from the people around you. And then for me it would have been around kind of going in and believing in the impact that you can have.
Yes.
And I think especially when I was a much younger practitioner, I found that much more difficult to get my head around, and just kind of went through everything, was working really hard and doing all of this and never really stopping to go, like, well, okay, you've done quite a lot here, like, you're doing a good job. And I think when I left my first kind of long-term position, I still wasn't, like, I'd still not really felt that confidence in what I'd done. And then I had a group of players come up to me after a few of them had made debuts, and on these occasions just saying thank you, And when they come up to you and you say that, you're like, whoa, okay.
That's amazing.
I've had a real, had an impact here. And I think really believing that you can, and that by having that confidence in yourself, so since then, I'd say my impact has just gone, accelerated, because I will go in and be confident. I know I can have an impact, and that makes me more clear with my message. It makes me more confidence in how the confidence in me delivering things. It's just, it's definitely kind of improved my practice by taking a step back and going, no, you've achieved a lot and you're doing really well here.
Absolutely,
and I think we're all quite harsh on ourselves as people, aren't we? So
Absolutely,
I think it's a really important thing to just take a step back and do that.
Definitely. That's really great insight. And you mentioned there about absolving. Certainly when I get the opportunity to interview people like yourself, Kim, I sort of listen in. I think that's a great takeaway for anybody. I'm sort of thinking about processing that myself really at the moment too, thinking, it is, and I think that quite often we're our own biggest critic in that respect, and sort of taking that step back, irrespective of whether you're a footballer or any profession really, sort of, looking from the outside in and thinking, okay, it's a really, really important point. We live in a performance-driven world in many respects, whether it's sort of sport or corporate or education. There's targets we aim for, and so on and so forth. But step back is key. And I suppose in sort of the sort of final sort of question I only ask is sort of your vision. I mean, you're working obviously at the highest level in football. Obviously, you'll have your own goals and you'll keep to yourself. But in terms of your vision, just more of the same, is it, Kim, for you? Sort of keep going and on direction that you are, and is there anything you can sort of share in terms of your sort of vision as a sports psychologist going forward?
Yeah, so I think for me it's around kind of keeping doing what I'm doing. I absolutely love kind of the work with these young athletes going through an academy journey and supporting them through key transitional periods. That's something I feel really, really passionate about, and I've preferred that side to my work than kind of anything else that I've done, is just kind of supporting those young people. And I think in terms of moving forward, it's around kind of communicating how I work, what I do with more and more people, to get out, kind of try and inspire young people to go into the profession, to get more of it, to get good people in these positions. I'm training at the moment to be a supervisor for young trainees coming through the qualification.
Wow.
And I think being in the applied environment day in, day out, I can offer that insight into what it actually looks like day to day, which I think is really important for young people coming through. And wanting to do that, potentially looking into that as a career. So I think it's around continuing to break the barriers to accessing psychology. For me, it's probably one of my main goals, and supporting kind of the young men that are coming through this, that they are valued beyond their performances on the pitch, that is just a tiny part of who they are. And if I can keep doing that, then that would be a really good kind of journey, I think, for me.
Absolutely.
To be going on.
Yeah, that's a really powerful message, I think, especially for any athlete, really, sort of, understanding that they're sort of they're valued as a person. It's not good. I suppose in sport, irrespective of how good you are as an athlete or footballer, no career is forever. So obviously the spectrum of sort of people who play at the highest level for a long time, some may not get there, but irrespective of no one's going to play forever professionally in one sense. So having that is sort of a really, really powerful message, certainly for anyone listening, and especially sort of we get a lot of listeners, a lot of young footballers listen as well, and young athletes, and sort of listening to that and sort of understanding that you are a valuable human being, irrespective of anything to do with sport, really.
So much more than just a player.
Absolutely.
So much more.
In helping absolutely. But it's been great speaking to you. It's sort of flown by, really has. It's been really fascinating. I know that for our listeners as well. Kim, being kind enough to join us. We wish you all the best in your sort of career, and no doubt you'll sort of keep doing the great work that you are doing. So thank you for coming on board, Kim. It's been great speaking to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. That was Kim Blewett on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, giving us a fascinating insight into the world of sports psychology. The aim of the show is to bring awareness to different roles. We also aim to increase participation, so if you can this weekend, get out there and play sport in any role that you can, or watch or get involved, and certainly always, if you feel free to give us some feedback on how and where you participate in and around the area. So it's the Friday Sports Show with your host in Petruzzi, 94.5 FM, Salford City Radio.